Thank you very much for tuning in right now to Sunday School Bonanza, brought to you by This Week in Mormons, your 10-ish minute gospel doctrine preparatory podcast. That's right, preparatory, like the Aaronic priesthood. Am I right?
You are right.
I'm joined here, of course, by Bill Doolittle, everyone's favorite.
Hey, everyone. I'm glad to be your favorite, and I'm glad Jeff is right. That's largely what I do on this thing is confirm Jeff.
Yeah, well, it works for me. I just let Bill do his thing, and then it boosts my self-esteem, and he says more intelligent things than I do, and it all works out great. Bill, happy to have you again. I think it's a good thing. So, of course, we are in Lesson 19 this week. None could deliver them but the Lord. I think this is an interesting lesson. We'll talk a lot about various themes of deliverance. And I remember, I can't think of whose talk it was in the last General Conference, made a point to mention sort of the themes of deliverance in the Book of Mormon. And I guess I hadn't thought a ton about it, how much that's a common theme throughout the Book of Mormon. And so I take more away from this than I did before, thinking about those themes of deliverance. Because
yes, it's true.
It's very metaphorical in many ways.
People are kind of getting out of Dodge all throughout the book, you know?
It's true. So we're in Mosiah 18 through 24, actually. A lot of chapters here, tons of different things happen throughout this chapter, or these many chapters. So I think Bill's going to start us off this time.
Yeah, so you'll remember from last week we have Abinadi bears his testimony. He teaches King Noah and all the priests, including Alma, and then he's killed. And so Alma flees because he had decided he was sympathetic to Abinadi. He felt the Spirit. He felt touched, felt guilty for what he was doing, and he left. And a lot of people slowly start to follow him, and then we read about them being taught in chapter 18. And this is where he forms the church. We see here a good example of baptism, right? He does it the right way. They're immersed in the water. And it's really a wonderful place. All these people come to understand they've been living in a people governed sort of by wickedness, right? By King Noah, and here they're learning about how to be members of the fold of God, learning to live in a different way with other people. And they learn to bear one another's burdens. That's their impulse once they're baptized. They say, living in this new way, we want to bear one another's burdens. We want to mourn with those that mourn. We want to comfort those that stand in need of comfort. You know, those are three pretty incredible impulses that not all people have naturally, right? It's not really a natural man thing to care for people when they're hurt or when they need caring for, but it is part of the gospel and part of what it means to follow Christ. And they also talk about the other important attribute of a disciple and someone who has taken upon them that covenant is that they'll stand as witnesses of God at all times. Kind of interesting to think right there. Alma has just seen Abinadi do that to a T, right? He's seen someone stand as a witness of God at all times and in all places. And he says, this is what we're supposed to be up to. And in fact, there's a great quote in the lesson manual from President Marion G. Romney describing that section of chapter 18 where it describes the baptismal covenant. He says, I know of no better explanation of the baptismal covenant, period. So if you want to understand what it means to be baptized and what you're taking upon yourself, this is the place to go. And the people accept it, and then they're described as having their hearts knit together in unity and love. And it's interesting. I mean, you think about all the interpersonal squabbles that we can have, even with people in the church. You know, this is a high standard that we often fall short of. But here we get a good example, so we can be inspired by it.
Well, I think it's beautifully done. And I agree. I mean, those verses right there in Mosiah 18, mostly verses 8 and 9, it encapsulates, I think, the true essence of discipleship right there. I mean, and that is effectively what we're doing when we're agreeing to be baptized. I mean, bear one another's burdens, mourn with those who mourn, all that stuff. And, of course, stand in all times and all places. And I think that's a big thing, learning to be a disciple in all times and all places. Because it can be very easy to be one when we really feel like we need to lean on the Lord, or very easy to do so if we're grateful and things are going well. But sometimes we're faced with adversity or pressure or like Abinadi, you're faced with perhaps your very death. And heaven forbid it gets to that. But there's a good lesson there in standing at all times and all places. Like whatever is that a primary saying? I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ, or similar to
it's Paul,
or also Romans. Yeah,
Romans.
Romans. Yeah, but I think sometimes it's easy to cower in fear if we're not bold enough with our testimonies and secure enough in our relationship with the Savior. And so it's a great thing to stand firm, steadfast. So after this great episode of these baptisms and the covenant, I mean, you picture these waters of Mormon. Incidentally, there are waters of Mormon today, by the way. There is Mormon Lake in Arizona.
Oh, really?
It's called that. It's up in the mountains.
And it must be clear.
Yeah.
It's probably beautiful.
That might even be where it happened.
That's what I would say if I were a tour guide.
We never know.
Yeah.
Maybe Flagstaff is actually where everything went down.
Could have been.
That's Zarahemla. Anyway, King Noah, as you might remember from before, King Noah, bad king, sentenced Abinadi to die by fire. Not the nicest of fellas. And so King Noah basically betrays his people. He flees. He basically tries to, he sees the army of the Lamanites advancing towards them. And rather than be like, manly king, he just like runs away, cowers away. And the people finally get fed up with King Noah. And what do? They burn him as well.
Like a garment in a hot furnace.
He receives his own just like Abinadi. And I was, whenever I visualize this episode, I think of the old Living Scriptures cartoons, right?
Mm-hmm.
The cartoony Noah, he's like running through the forest and they tie him up and then they show the fire. Not graphically, of course, I'm afraid, but
for kids.
And because Noah has a lot of serious escapes throughout this whole episode. I mean, when Gideon's pursuing him,
almost gets him.
You figure it's over, and then Noah goes, hey, check it out, guy. There's Lamanites coming right there, and Gideon's like, oh man, almost had my prize. So he,
I always wondered why Gideon bought that argument. It was like, no, I'm really worried about the people. Gideon must have been like a really sweet person.
He must have been. And as a side note, something I love that we see in the Book of Mormon, this might be just from a sheer like, if you view it like a movie or in a theatrical sense, that people like Gideon show up later on in different books.
Yeah.
And they're mentioning this was the same Gideon who whatever. And you're like, Gideon still has a role in this government. Or the same thing with, is that Zenos? No, it's not Zenos. Walk me through it. One of the guys who's another sort of antichrist becomes good, accompanies them on the journey to the Rami Umptum. I'm blanking on the name.
It's not Zenith. That's the most recent Z name I've got in my head. He goes, it's the guy that Alma and Amulek preached to. He's a lawyer.
Right.
And he...
Any names?
Well,
maybe we'll get there someday. Point is, I love... Zeezrom. And I love that even... it shows the totality of the actual society of the Book of Mormon, stuff like that. It's a bit of a digression, but I love that you see them throughout the remainder of the scriptures. Like Gideon, who stayed around. Zeezrom, who... jumped on board, and later on you see he's part of their task force basically to go and
go save the people,
go save the other people. So it's cool. So sadly we say goodbye to Noah, but I think the best thing we can learn here is that his wickedness will always have its reward, shall we say, no matter what.
A nice warm reward.
Anyway,
speaking of digressions, at this point
okay.
I want to, because it gets complicated here
right.
with all the peoples moving around, I want to offer you, Jeff, for free, a metaphor to understand all the peoples moving around in the Book of Mosiah, because we're about to get them all home.
Is this going to involve branches of Judah? Is that what we're dealing with here?
Less holy than that.
Okay.
Imagine you're playing basketball.
All right.
And you're on the ground level, and the ground level is Zarahemla. That's where all the Nephites start, right?
Just chilling on the court right there, hanging out in the key, ready for the free throw.
And you're ready to go.
All right.
And then you decide to do a crazy big shot. You're Zenith. And Zenith and his people are the basketball, and they get thrown up, and then it gets stuck on the roof. Remember how that used to happen when you were a kid? You get a ball stuck on the roof. It's a real problem.
Right. Sure.
Eventually it's got to come down, but it takes a while. It turns out 3 generations. So then you're trying to get it down, and the ball breaks into 2 parts, and you shoot at the ball. You do something to break it into parts so it'll come down.
I just want to work with you here. So a basketball, an inflated object, is going to split into 2.
I mean,
It's okay. I see what you're trying to get at. Okay,
we're trying to break it apart.
Fair enough. Because it's like a jawbreaker.
Okay. Maybe a pool ball.
A pool ball. But all right. So the basketball is now cleaved in 2.
So it's now a cleft ball, and one part of this ball is Alma's people, one part of it is Limhi's people, and because they've broken apart now, they both drift back down to the earth, come back to Zarahemla. So the first half of the ball to come back to Zarahemla is Limhi's people. So Limhi, you'll remember, is Noah's son. Noah was wicked. Limhi understood that. So when Noah dies, Limhi becomes the king, and he's got his people. He has to negotiate with the Lamanites, right, who actually were coming. Noah wasn't lying when he told that to Gideon. And so they suffer for a while under oppression. They're trying to get out from under it.
And Limhi's a pretty good guy. He's aware of the follies of his father. I don't know if he's like an exceptionally righteous, privy to inspiration type, but he's like a straight shooter.
He's a decent guy. Yeah. He knows he reads, he understands he knows the score, right? So he says we need to be righteous, we need to be humble. Let's not try to fight the Lamanites, etc. And then Gideon shows back up, as Jeff said, and said, "Hey, I got a plan. Let's get them drunk. Let's give them some really potent wine." And the Lamanite guards then, of course, are passed out. They're hungover, and all of Limhi's people pack up and run off into the wilderness and are led back to Zarahemla by Ammon, who shows up at this point.
Not to be confused with Ammon, the son of different Ammon. There's a lot of name repetition in the Book of Mormon.
First Ammon that we hear of leads them back. And actually, that's an interesting point. I've often thought of this return. You sort of have a people who leave home. They go up to Nephi, like we came to the earth, and then they get themselves into trouble, and they can't get themselves out. They can't go back home until someone comes from where they were before, Ammon, who comes and finds them and then helps lead them back home, just like Jesus leads us back to the presence of our Heavenly Father. It could be a huge metaphor in addition to the basketball metaphor.
I like the basketball metaphor.
That's 2 for 1 right
there,
Jeff.
Okay, I'll accept it. And of course, they eventually get back, and they're back with the people of Zarahemla. And then we see at the same time, Alma and his people, of course, have long since fled. And there's a period when they, they're basically taken captive by the Lamanites, unfortunately. Something interesting to note that the lesson has, and I never thought about this before, that back in the day, the first time the Lamanites attacked these people, when Noah was their king, they received no warning. No advance notice from the Spirit or anything. But under the newfound, righteous stewardship of Alma, they know it's coming, and they, they weather it, basically. And eventually they are delivered throughout having to imbibe anybody. The Lord just delivers them basically in the night.
It's kind of the difference between a politician and a prophet, right? Limhi says, let's get them drunk. Alma says, I'm just going to pray, thanks.
Yeah, basically sums it up. And then, of course, running out of time here, but, what do the people say? Or what does Alma say? The people want him to be their king. They revere him immensely when he comes back to Zarahemla. Mm-hmm. His response, of course, is no, because it's dangerous for one man to be thinking of himself above another, as Alma says. One man to have all that power. I think we can learn a lot from Alma in that case, that it's not wrong to lead people in a righteous, humble sense. But if we are trying to put ourselves above others in our leadership, and this is important, this is applicable for us, whether it's in our professional lives or our spiritual lives, in whatever capacity we're serving, we can't have a mentality that we are above others and leading in that sense. We have to lead as one of them with the sense of humility. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about this a bit before. I don't know if you have any insights, Bill, because this is when we get the reign of the judges commences now, if I'm correct. Mm-hmm. And we'll see this throughout, for a very long time in the Book of Mormon now, the reign of the judges. Was the judge that different than a king? Isn't he just put there? Don't the people say, you're the judge guy, be the judge?
I mean,
and interpret stuff?
Yeah.
Condemn people if needs be?
I mean, there's a couple of differences. I mean, there's sort of appellate review. There was a check and balance, like lower judges could throw out the higher judge or overturn a decision. But it's an interesting point that we all, it maybe says something about us as people that we prefer to have one person who will answer for and thus needs to be in charge of everything. True.
I always heard that Ninth Circuit based out there in Bountiful was just
they have
difficult place, right?
They have trouble.
But we learn a lot. I think we learn a lot about leadership and, of course, about the sense of deliverance throughout these chapters. A lot of great stuff here. Elder Marvin J. Ashton said regarding freedom to choose, our own course and stuff like that, which is a big part of the Book of Mormon. He says, our freedom to choose our course of conduct does not provide personal freedom from the consequences of our performances. God's love for us is constant and will not diminish, but he cannot rescue us from the painful results that are caused by the wrong choices. And I think the setting up of the reign of the judges puts that perfectly. It allows the people to have their agency and to learn right from wrong and to fail and to, we start to see the cycle once again going in and out from here on out. So, Bill, thanks for being here today.
Jeff, thank you so much for having me.
So nice to have you. Folks, this has been Lesson 19. None could deliver them but the Lord. Sunday School Bonanza. Please, visit us, of course, at thisweekinmormons.com or send us an email, contact at thisweekinmormons and facebook.com/thisweekinmormons. Pleasure to do this with you. Look forward to bringing you another Gospel Doctrine Rundown next week. Bill, thanks again.
Thank you.
And we'll talk to all of you later. Sunday School Bonanza, brought to you by This Week in Mormons.